Hello, my name's Andy Home and I'm Senior Metals Columnist at Reuters, specialising in industrial metals, including our favourite metal, tin.
Yes, and hello, I'm Tim Moody, President and CEO of Pan Global Resources. We're primarily a copper exploration company with projects in Spain, but we also have quite an advanced copper discovery, which has quite an interesting amount of tin with some great metallurgy as well. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this discussion.
So am I. Look, I think tin had quite a good year, so quite prominent in most people's thoughts and conversations. So today we're going to continue that education and maybe look back a little bit at what happened in 2024 and maybe looking forward to what we think may happen in 2025. So Andy, I'm going to start with you. So the investment case for tin, has anything changed?
I think, we've got to separate that question out into two parts, right? So let's look at a medium term, say through the end of this decade. I was actually just catching up on the International Tin Association's seminar slides held in December. Recommend anyone to go and look at what is a great resource for if you're interested in tin. And they make a really convincing case that tin has a big supply problem by the end of this decade. Too few projects, too much concentration of existing production, too little investment, right? Let's look then at the very short term. Now, there was a lot of interest, I think, from the investment community in tin last year, and we kind of know why. There was kind of a very compelling narrative of supply disruption, both in Indonesia, the world's largest exporter of refined tin, and in Myanmar, the world's largest exporter of tin concentrate, right? And for most of last year, if you look at the London Metal Exchange suite of portfolio of base metal contracts, tin was the clear outperformer because of those supply concerns. But I think something changed coming into around about the fourth quarter. If you look at investor positioning on the LME tin contract, you'll see that actually there was a considerable sell-off, a reduction in the long positions that were held around the middle of the year. And for me, that was kind of nothing more than long liquidation. Tin probably didn't perform as well as people were hoping, even though it was the outperformer. And I think there was some disappointment coming in at the end of the year. And I was just looking at the most recent figures from the London Metal Exchange, and it shows that the investment community ended the year pretty much neutral on tin. A lot of the long positions have been sold off, a slight build in short positions. We should always mention, we talk about the markets, we should mention what's happening in the Shanghai Futures Exchange, which is also obviously a major driver of price for tin. And there again, tin was really out of favor by the end of last year. Volumes down, open interest down, against the broader trend in the base metals portfolio of Shanghai. So I think there was kind of like the buzz that was there maybe in the first half of the year seemed to dissipate in the second half of the year. Actually, we enter from an investment fund community, from what I can interpret, pretty flat to neutral about tin. But that is the short-term outlook. So the medium-term outlook, I think, is unchanged.
Okay, so medium term, and I'm going to stick with you, Andy, just for a second. You say, obviously, there's a few potential disruptions, or potential disruptions. People talking about the Myanmar project in Myanmar, obviously, 7% of the world's production. Has that completely gone away? And if it is going to go away, are there any other kind of red flags, any other kind of components that you think could kind of change the kind of supply demand dynamics in the market for 2025?
The first thing I would say is the Myanmar situation has not changed. To the best of anyone's knowledge, there is still a ban on new mining at what is one of the world's largest tin deposits, right? You've seen that in the Chinese trade import figures. You've seen imports from Myanmar of raw materials fall by about 50% over the last 12 months. So nothing changes there at all. Indonesia is also a really unpredictable country insofar as we have to throw into the mix changes to the mining license scheme, There is an ongoing sort of like unfolding scandal around sort of like tin trading within Indonesia 4 or 5 years ago. The whole industry seems to be under special investigation at the moment. So I would argue that actually neither of the two big disruptions of last year are suddenly miraculously going to disappear this year. I think the problem last year was everyone was so focused in on the supply dynamic that we sort of collectively forgot the demand side of the picture. And actually, tin did not have a great demand year last year. I think the ITA came out with an estimate that actually demand was on track to contract by about 4 to 5%, which is pretty disappointing outcome. So to some extent, though, that weakness in demand offset the weakness in supply. You see what I mean? It's also certainly true that China had built up stockpiles of both raw material and refined tin coming into 2024. I think those stockpiles have gone, from what anyone can tell, right? I mean, there are persistent reports coming out of China about raw material shortages at key smelters there, problems with scrap internally as well. So weirdly enough, I think the dynamic of the market last year is that demand weakness really masked, to some extent, the impact of those supply disruptions. So coming into this year, of course, if those supply disruptions haven't gone away, either demand remains equally weak, in case, again, it will alleviate the situation, or if we get any recovery, we could see those supply disruptions really start to bite in 2025.
And if I look at obviously what's happening in Indonesia, you mentioned Indonesia as a potential big driver here. They implemented a nickel export ban in 2020, and they're trying to do the same thing with tin. They're looking at how they go about doing that. But I think from what are the lessons to be learned in terms of what's happened to the nickel market in the sense that anything from Indonesia is pretty much backed by financially, and then subsequently the product heading towards China, in which case we're talking the world of bifurcated market and bifurcated pricing potentially. Do you think that tin it's a much smaller market, but do you think it has potential to fall into that kind of formula, that kind of process that nickel's established?
Okay. Yeah, we should take Indonesia very seriously in its ambitions to drive its tin sector downstream into value-added products. We've seen what it's done in nickel. I mean, the political will is there. They do have a problem with tin, right? So if you're going to make the comparison with nickel, when it started with nickel is they were shipping, basically, just ore to China, right? So they obviously wanted to sort of like turn that into, well, let's process the stuff, make it into metal, which is where they are now. Bear in mind, that's already happened with tin in Indonesia. You're not allowed to export ore, right? They spent most of the 2010s tightening up the rule book. Sort of preventing shipments of raw materials of any sort. So the problem is when you're already producing refined tin and you want to go further downstream, where are you going to go? Because most of tin is used in circuit board soldering. Are the Indonesians going to be set up a brand new circuit board sector? They could do some sort of like, maybe they could do something in terms of sort of tin plating at a steel mill. They could do something in the tin chemical area. But actually, I think this is one of the reasons we have uncertainty about Indonesia. You have the political will to sort of like to process tin further, but they're not sure themselves how to go about doing it. It's one thing just to say, okay, build a new smelter, for the nickel industry, fine, we can do that and export the metal. When you say, well, I want a whole new sort of like, a circuit board soldering and chip manufacturing sector to absorb my tin, hey, that's a completely different sort of like, ambition, right?
Well, it is, and it's a different industry, different skill sets as well, from a very, very low base of zero at the moment. Just on the supply, Tim, I want to bring you in here because 80% of global reserves are located in just 5 countries, right? You've got China, Indonesia, Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil. So as a company which produces, potentially will produce tin as a byproduct, your copper, gold primarily, but you've got tin in there. How do you read the supply side of the equation here? Are you seeing companies out there who may be able to kind of feed into that kind of future demand that Andy's mentioned?
Yeah, well, look, I'm certainly won't claim to be an expert and in terms of the tin economy and outlook and so on. Andy's far better equipped to comment on that. But I would say that now that we've got we've found what I think is an important component of tin in our main project, our flagship discovery. It's been quite a learning experience for me too, trying to sort of delve into what is the outlook for tin, how important could the tin component of our discovery be going forward. So I think it sort of goes with copper in some respects if you understand what's the world's, with the energy transition and the increased demand that's going to bring for not only copper, but for tin. And I think that's a sort of a difference from perhaps the previous 20 or 30 years. The energy transition is driving a whole new sort of market demand, particularly for copper. But I think it also follows that tin demand is going to be higher as well, whether it be for coatings on solar panels or just as the solder, which is the main industry for connecting everything electrical. So and together with that, you've got a good portion of the world still moving from poverty into the middle class. So I think the way I see it, the demand for tin is looking better. I think just to support that, given our projects in Europe, there are very few sources of tin in Europe outside of recycling. So where are the tin mines in Europe? I mean, you ask most people, they can't think of any. So I think when we come to produce, hopefully producing tin in the future, I think we'll be pushing an open door in terms of people willing to take it. In fact, we've already had interest from a couple of the smelters. So I think I think that for us, having a source of tin in Europe is a big advantage.
Well, I guess that touches upon the potential bifurcation of the market, whether it be in terms of price or just in terms of destination. I mean, Andy, do you, obviously we talked a lot about the Asia component here, the kind of ex-Asia element in terms of the industry as a whole, its ability to process and produce, let alone supply into. Do you think there's going to be a divergence? Is the West going to have to look to kind of stand on its own 2 feet as part of this kind of critical metals security, which everyone keeps talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I really think so. I mean, I've described tin as sort of like, the forgotten critical mineral to some extent. I mean, anyone gets super excited about lithium or sort of cobalt, for the energy transition. But tin is an essential metal, right? And it is starting to be recognised at the government level as being so. Then put that into the broader geopolitical metal wars at the moment, as I call them, right? You have the US is either sort of like, raising tariffs on Chinese metals, or the Chinese are cutting off exports to the US when we look at germanium and gallium. You've got to ask yourself, in this context, it's not inconceivable that tin could also be weaponized as part of this kind of geopolitical tension. And if it is, we have a big problem in the West because of the concentration of production in Asia. So, I think, as we could have the same conversation whether we were talking about antimony, gallium, or tin, right? There is a new awareness, I think, across Western governments that they need to diversify their key critical mineral supply chains. And that central to that question is, of course, the dominance of China. But it goes beyond that. I mean, if COVID taught us anything, is, you really don't, stretched supply chains are a big problem in this world, right? Throw in sort of like the political tensions, which are probably only going to get worse under a Trump administration. Yeah, I think there is an awareness. The West has to do more. I mean, and tin's a great example of this, as you just said. Look at the concentration of supply. Look where it is concentrated. You know, we're having a conversation here about a sort of a mine in the independent vast state of Myanmar, right? Of which I'm no expert on that either. No, none of us is. This is not necessarily the healthier supply base for metal that we all think is going to be critical over the next 20 years, right?
Yeah, no, I think that is the point, essential point here is like not enough people understand the dynamics of the tin market in terms of they know which countries it's produced from, but in terms of how it's relatively opaque in terms of the data available is the problem here, and that causes a problem for kind of pure play tin producers, right, or wannabe producers, because the money doesn't understand the sector, and if it doesn't understand it, it's harder and more expensive to kind of fund it. So if I'm looking at long term, I think the mood is bullish. It's fair. I think it's fair. Both of you would probably agree with that. But it is sort of subject to a lot of kind of volatility because there's like small players can impact the market greatly, and the geopolitics of it going forward is potentially quite disruptive, disruptive, I should say, as well. But what about the kind of the depletion side of the equation here? I mean, I'll come back to a question I asked you a second ago, Tim, which is like, and I know this is just a byproduct for you. It's not kind of central or core or, quite frankly, mission critical for you, but it's a nice add-on in terms of margin for you, tin. In terms of the market that you've been looking at now, you're seeing a lot of chat, but are there going to be a lot of new suppliers, attempting to get into production from what you can see on the public markets?
Well, it's pretty interesting. If I look, and I've been trying to gather information to sort of compare the things, simple things like the metallurgy of what we've got with other emerging projects and deposits. And look, it's not easy to get the information. Even the list of potential new developers is really short as far as I can see. And behind that, the information, the transparency around things like metallurgy and so on is really sort of low when you compare it to sort of the copper industry, for example, etc. So look, I think in terms of new supply, I mean, it's still a pretty small world out there in terms of potential new developers in the next decade when demand's expected to grow. So it's an interesting time, and I think just following on from Andy's point here, with the let's say the disruption caused by geopolitics, etc. That's throwing another dynamic into the equation. I mean, again, I focus a little bit more on Europe here. Europe essentially relies on importing tin, apart from its recycling industry, which is an important component. But it has to import just about all its tin. I mean, probably less than 1% of it is coming from domestic supplies. So, and where's that tin coming from? It's from what I can understand, and Andy can correct me on this, but I think most of it is coming from South America or Africa. So again, we're talking mainly developing countries. So this is a sort of must be a concern for European countries. I mean, Europe's an important consumer of tin. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I think the phrase I remember from the last conversation with Andy was he called it a kind of continuously challenged dynamic, which was probably a fair reflection of and that was off the back of the fact saying, like, it's a small market, 400,000 ton global market, so small things can make big impacts. I mean, Tim, clearly you're not going to make tin the kind of forefront message here for you. I get, but you must be sort of intrigued as to that kind of future supply profiles. Anything that you want to ask Andy with regards to how he views things going forward?
Yeah, look, I don't want to sort of say we're not so interested in the tin on our project. Actually, it's 15 to 20% of the in situ value. And it's another sort of hedge on. If we're just relying on copper, we've got another metal there that we can rely on. So I think the tin in our project could really make quite a big difference in terms of the overall economics of the project. So look, I think it's really important for us. And as I say, I think the having a tin project in Europe is somewhat unique and advantageous, and given the way the world's going, tin at the moment is just outside the critical materials sort of box in Europe, but I can easily see it shifting into that critical materials box.
Okay, I hear you, and your points are well made. But as you say, there's not a lot of information in the market. It's hard to come by in lots of in lots of ways. Here, is there anything that you would ask Andy in terms of, he's the tin guy.
Not a
Not anyone who knows more about it than this guy, but not from that point of view. But broadly, say, what in terms of that demand going forward, what comfort, Tim, would you and your shareholders be looking for as to what the future holds? If I say 10, 15, 20% of your bottom line potentially.
Yeah, we could probably sit here for half a day. I've got a lot of questions.
Okay, top three.
I think
top three.
I think what most investors want to know is, what's the price of tin likely to be in the next few years? How's that looking? And I'd be interested to see what Andy's view of that is, particularly if tin moves into the critical materials list. How that changes for projects in Europe, but perhaps for those countries who are reliant mainly on importing tin from let's say developing or higher risk jurisdictions.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Tim, I just had my crystal ball in the next room, but but I think one of the things, this is actually quite a serious question, and it's probably we should throw this into the mix, right? You don't need to be a market specialist to pull up a chart of the tin price over the last 10 years and draw a conclusion that this has been a very volatile market. Yeah, we've been up to 50,000, we've been below 20,000, right? This is partly because it's a small market, and small markets are always going to be quite volatile, I would suggest. It's also down to the transparency issues that we've been talking. So, we do have a really, really broad potential spectrum, even based on the last 10 years trading, or where tin could be in 10 years' time. And I do think this is quite a big problem for guys like you, because, I could come around and say, look, it's going back to 50,000, and probably at some stage it will, but it could also drop below 20,000 at some stage. And if that is just the time when you are bringing on production, that's a really big problem, right? And I think this is one of the issues, in terms of financing for this commodity, is that anyone can do this. Pull up that chart and see what you think tin is going to be in a couple of years' time. I think your advantage, Tim, is that you got this as a brilliant byproduct to copper. And copper is probably, none of them are easy to forecast, but at least you've got a good, transparent, big liquid market that a lot of guys will be able to sort of project, a price forecast 5-10 years forward. It is really difficult to do in tin because of all the reasons we mentioned, right? I've got another question for you, Tim. When we talk about the scarcity of new resource, it's a kind of a double problem. You're quite right. You're one of the few people who's sitting on tin in the ground in Europe. The second problem, though, is where's that going to be made into refined tin? Because that's another weakness of the West in many of these critical metals, right? Is not only did we stop mining, we stopped smelting and refining as well, or just switched them to secondary production from scrap. Are you getting, do you see a way that your byproduct could be treated in Europe, or is it going to have to go to one, say, Asia to get sort of like processed?
No, I think this is, I'm glad to sort of ask that question. Again, we had to sort of look around, where do you send the tin concentrate? And you've got Erebus in Germany. Then there is a small smelter in Spain currently, and there is. And I spoke with the head of the smelter in Huelva in southern Spain, which is mainly copper, but does other metals as well. And they're adding a tin component to their smelter. So that's the Atlantic Copper smelter, just about 70 kilometres from us. So we've had preliminary discussions both with the German smelting group as well as with Atlantic Copper, but we're still in the very early stage in the process. We haven't published a resource yet, but so look, I'm not too concerned about that, and I think it's more than likely we'll be supplying the concentrate into a domestic smelter, and hopefully in Spain.
I mean, and I think that is kind of the long-term answer across the critical mineral spectrum. It's like when the US revived the rare earth mining. Yeah, initially, where was it all going? You had to go to China to get processed. I mean, which kind of defeats the purpose of having your own mine, right? And I think that's kind of like really top of policymakers' minds now. They've understood both in Europe and in the United States. Look, there's no point just doing the mines if you're going to send it to China to be processed. I mean, that's not that's not going to give a long-term solution to solve your dependence on China, right? So I think it's kind of like, as I said, I think from a policymaker point of view, when they think of critical minerals and metal supply chains now, they've learned that it's not just about mining. They're looking for integration, or regional integration, such as Tim's discussing. At the moment, it is unfortunate that, tin is not top of mind, the European Union in terms of critical metals. But I do regard that as well, that may well change as well, in which case I suspect a lot more attention will be put onto the tin mining sector.
Well, it's just outside that critical minerals box, if you've looked at it for the European Union. So I can easily see it sort of moving into that box in the next couple of years as sort of geopolitical uncertainties unfold. It won't take much, and of course we've got an advantage here with a project in Spain, and hopefully near a place where it can be we can transport it and get it smelted. So I think what I hope would happen is if it does move into that critical materials listed, that might attract a premium to the price.
Yeah, the problem for everyone is there are a lot of metals in that critical minerals list, right? Sort of on both sides of the Atlantic. And the way the sort of the priority cycle is moving is actually being a little bit determined by China. So China has actually started sort of like putting export controls on things like gallium and germanium. Obviously, if you're a policymaker, you see that in the headlines. Guess what's top of your list suddenly, right? So yet again, tin is paying the penalty a little bit for being the forgotten sort of like element here, right?
Well, it's again, I sort of point to the solar industry, for example. With tin going into the coatings on solar panels. Spain has a pretty big solar industry. So I think it won't be forgotten for long. I think it is going to be pretty important.
And okay, so let's look kind of forward to in terms of this year. What are the things that you're looking to see happen in the space, Andy? What needs to happen versus what you think could happen, could be the dramatic driver here. Obviously, the critical minerals list component would be one, but maybe more geopolitically, because what do you think?
Yeah, first of all, I think we have yet to see the Myanmar mining ban fully sort of make its way through to the refined metal segment of the market. One of the things I'm looking at for tin this year, short term, all eyes on China. China's the buyer of all that Myanmar raw material, right? And what we've seen over the course of the last few months, if you like, you've seen visible inventories of tin with the Shanghai Futures Exchange draw steadily lower. 20,000 tons maybe earlier this year to about 6,000, 7,000 tons. You've also seen China sort of like switch from net exporter of refined tin to net importer of refined tin. If I put those two things together, it suggests to me that Myanmar mining ban is now starting to bite China's domestic market. They're drawing down inventory and they're importing more sort of metal, right? And I think how that pans out will be my short-term focus in terms of price evolution. We expect the unexpected from Indonesia at the start of any year in terms of export licensing. So we'll throw that one into the mix as well, right? It could be ironic that just as the funds are slightly given up on tin, the reality of what they were trying to capture may actually unfold in the next few months, right? Then put that into the bigger picture here. Okay, we await further information about what Trump is going to do on tariffs. This is a double-edged sword for all the metals, right? I mean, will tariffs be put on the raw material or on the products, if you see what I mean? So there's already disruption in other metal markets because of US penalty tariffs on Chinese goods, Russian goods, etc. So that's kind of another potential area of disruption, right? But on the flip side of it, look, if Trump is going to sort of put tariffs on all Chinese goods, everything, that's going to have a really big impact on white goods, consumer durables, i.e. everything that we kind of are looking at in terms of tin demand via solder, right? So you got to think of that, if he's going to provoke a trade war with, say, manufactured goods at the center of that war, that's probably not good for tin demand, if you think about it, right? So, as I said, but you've got to see it both ways. Tariffs can apply both to the metal and the raw material or the products that they go into. So I'm not going to try and forecast what Donald Trump does in his first few days of office. I mean, frankly, forecasting the tin price is probably easier than that.
Well, invading Greenland and Panama, things like that.
That's right. Exactly. Who knows?
Right. Okay. So, Tim, are you kind of? There's a lot of new data there, and I think it's really good news that people like Andy, pay attention to the detail and sort of say the market is quite complex. There is some geopolitics to it. It's not just limited to uranium and rare earths. It affects all metals, especially with these potential tariffs coming through. Are you discouraged by what you hear? Is there an opportunity for companies like yourself as a result?
Look, what we're hearing is uncertainty, high risk, different levels of risk. So I think to some extent I think it just sort of I guess makes me more encouraged about the what we've got as being something that is somewhat insulated from a lot of those risks. Having something in Europe, as I say, something that that could be where we can have it treated domestically. I mean, we're away from all of that stuff, and having had early conversations already, as I say, I think when we hopefully come to producing a tin concentrate, we'll be pushing an open door, and hopefully we can attract a premium, not only because it looks like we're going to produce a very good, clean tin concentrate, but because it is domestic supply. And I think it was really interesting last year that of all the news releases we posted, the one that got the most feedback, the most attention, was the tin metallurgy. Now, metallurgy in the mineral exploration business is generally a pretty dry topic. So I thought it was quite interesting, and it sort of was curious to us. But look, we'll take it. But I think that's sort of telling in some respects, and I don't know what you think, Andy, but anyway, that's where I live. I think
Tim, I think you put your finger on it, and the buzzword in Washington at the moment is not deglobalization; it's de-risking, right? There's acceptance that you may not be able to sort of like wean yourself completely off Chinese people, but you can de-risk your supply chain, right? And that applies across the full critical metals space, and exactly that. If you have a resource in the ground in Europe with the potential to get it processed in Europe, that is my definition of de-risking tin supply, right? Not being beholden to what the next Indonesian sort of like, shake-up of its export system will be. Not beholden to what's happened to Myanmar in Myanmar, right? So de-risking is, I think, actually the critical buzzword here. And from that point of view, anyone who's got a good tin resource in Europe is probably sitting on a good resource, right? I was almost going to say gold mine, but
it's interesting, Matt, that when I started talking about finding tin with our copper project, a lot of the investors we were speaking to didn't understand tin. I think they're better informed now, but it was really interesting trying to sort of educate people. Well, tin's actually quite an important metal. It's 3 times the price, roughly, of copper. Don't ignore tin. This could be a valuable byproduct. So, yeah.
But now, the funny thing is, Tim, is that if you go back 30, 40 years, right, the US government agreed that tin was so important that it stockpiled huge tonnages of the stuff, right? And you go, why would it do that? Tin was literally what fed the army, because how did the food get transported to the front lines? In tin cans, right? And they worked out, hold on, no tin cans, hungry soldiers, we're going to lose the war, right, in Korea or something. But fast forward 40 years, hardly any tin, or let's say about 10% of tin usage comes from that traditional sort of like tin can sort of sector, right? Tin's reinvented itself yet again. Its criticality is now because of its soldering sort of properties and for its use in sort of like the EV batteries, right? But that's just an example of how everyone kind of collected, the society has taken its eyes off the tin ball, if you like, right? Everyone knew what a tin can was 30 years ago. Everyone understood how important it was for transporting foods around. But in the interim, so that reinvention of tin as a soldering material has just largely bypassed the general public and the investment public. Yeah, unless you've been really focused in on what's been going on in this metal, this is all news to people. Most people still think it's only used for tin canning, right?
It's true. But we're going to educate them. We're going to 2025, the year of educating people on the tin market, and it's a huge potential going forward. Guys, look, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your time. I'm glad that you two also met each other as well. It's quite interesting sort of hear from just slightly different perspectives on how this market is potentially going to move forward. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Matt.